You understand how racism is misogynistic? Okay? You understand how racism is misogynistic, even when it's committed against men. Because you know how racism is done on men? Okay? Why is racism misogynistic? Okay? In Australia, we've got a very good example of that. Good's not the right word. We've got a clear example of that. So, as anyone would know, Australia's original cultures are the oldest in the world, and there's hundreds of them. The entire continent chock full of hundreds of language groups and cultures. Chockers all the way through, going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, beyond counting and reckoning. Bare minimum, 50 to 60,000 years. Guaranteed at least 50, 60,000 years. In some cases, they reckon at least 150,000. They found middens up north. They reckon might be 150,000 years old. There's cave paintings. They found cave paintings of people's hands. Father and son went deep into the cave. They counted how many hands and averaged it out and said, a generation is 30 years, they said on average. Fellas counted 100,000 years. They couldn't go further into the cave. It was too old. Rocks had fallen. Actual geological shifts had occurred. It had been that long. Okay, that's how all the cultures in Australia are. Now let's put this into context. At no time did the colonial powers, like powers are not the right word, the Poms and that. At no time did any of those guys, when they showed up at Sydney Cove, Botany Bay and whatever else, ever deny the existence of Aboriginal people. It's got a big deal. Bennelong went to England and everything and came back again and all kinds of things went on. There's no denial of it. Everyone knew they were there. A massive part of the story. Interaction, who moves here, who moves there, frontier wars and this and that and the other. Went on and on like that. All kinds of things went on. Just in Sydney. Just in Sydney was a big complicated mess of a story. Let alone one went everywhere else. Okay? And although there's a shit ton of violence to that, and indeed rape, it's also the case that occasionally there was, people wandering off who didn't like the country that they came from and was trying to do something else. So maybe one day those stories will get a bigger hearing once people fully acknowledge the gravity of the frontier wars part and how it affected everyone, and the gravity of what happened to convicts as well, and the injustice that was perpetrated on the convicts for them to be abducted from their country in the first place and treated like slaves for crimes that they would not have committed if England had not been ripping people off in the first place. Okay, the complete lie of the penal colony idea and how it relates to the American Revolutionary War and stuff like that, all the lies and frauds that go with that will all be uncovered one day. Okay, and how those lies and frauds propping up the propaganda of the imperial state, and what they've been doing is hiding what actually happened to people. The injustice committed by the plebeian first in the country that they came from before they was convict, and then brought the problem to another country and frontier war there. Now, with you knowing all that, okay, you overseas people, you know about didgeridoo, you darkies, as they're sometimes properly known, you know about boomerangs, don't you? You know about dot art, you know about all that stuff, okay? Okay, maybe you don't really know about it properly, but you've heard of it. So you're pretty damn sure you've heard of an Indigenous Australian person or Indigenous person from Australia. Okay? You know they exist. You absolutely know they exist. Did you know at the founding of the 1901 Federal Constitution in Melbourne, when that was Australia's capital, so in 1901 the capital of Australia was Melbourne in Victoria. Okay? Did you know when they wrote that constitution, one of the bases they claimed for their ability to have federation was called a Terra Nullius? Did you know that in section 63 of that constitution it says that special laws can be made concerning members of any race, especially the Aboriginal race? Did you know that that was the founding of the White Australia policy? Did you know that Terra Nullius was like that as well? And do you know what the Terra Nullius doctrine actually were? The Terra Nullius doctrine means empty land. Don't mean there wasn't anybody there. That means the Poms show up and there was no one there. They could just do what they like. Complete denial of the existence of Aboriginal people. And while they were doing that, and they did do that. They did do that. You'll find out why that's important to know that. And how they could stand on that hypocrisy, we don't know. But apparently they did. And while they were doing that, they'll turn around and say, oh, Aboriginal people don't exist. And his point is what? Okay, Terra Nullius is like saying Aboriginal people don't exist. It sounds fucking stupid, don't it? But that's what they done. They were saying Aboriginal people don't exist because it's empty land. Plain as the nose in your bloody face, that's not true, isn't it? Right? Okay, it should be obvious. Okay? But nonetheless, that was their doctrine. That was their basis of why they were doing what they're doing, apparently. And then their constitution cracked. Hang on a second. Wait, you can make special discriminatory laws for people that don't exist to you. You're allowed to do whatever you like because they don't exist to you, including to them. If you don't believe it exists. Okay, Federation, you're sounding pretty fucking stupid right now. Okay, at that particular point in history, you sounded fucking dumb. You sound like complete fucking dumb assholes. Like, how can you simultaneously say that people don't exist and their land was empties, okay, but it's saying that you can make special laws about them? Okay, well, that kind of logic was quite suited to the Catholic and Anglican tradition, because this was in the 1700s that they started to get their ideas from. They was going to take it anyway. It goes back to that logic, right? 1901 was later, but it was not far enough later into the future for people to start getting a bit clearer. Okay? Here's what happened, your precious Aristotle. You know, one of those fancy people, there's a video on Good Stuff in Ozpol. That's called one of the liked videos for Australians who's talking about history. Mr. M History or whatever he's called, okay? And you'll see in there that they talk about things like about how he wants to go back to ancient Greece when we're trying to figure out where Terra Australis and Candida was and stuff like that. Okay, go back there to exact same time period in history and look at Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle believed that women don't have souls. In other words, they don't exist. Aristotle was from a long line of ancient Greek thinkers who also believed that. Aristotle was also one of the philosophers that influenced the founding of the Catholic Church, or the Vatican later on. And so, but that's hang on. No, Aristotle wasn't 300 BC. He was probably closer to 200 or 300 AD. Oh, we don't really know. Go on. Can't be bothered fact checking right now. Do your own homework. The point is that if you actually look at some of the Vatican commentators and stuff like that, they talk about the role of Aristotle in the founding of the Vatican and stuff like that. Okay, so why would he do that if Aristotle wasn't a Christian? Aristotle wasn't a Jew. Aristotle was an ancient Greek. Or maybe a Hellenic Greek is more accurate. What's he got to do with it? Well, he's just another guy from that particular point in history that had inherited an idea from his ancient Greek forebears going back a few thousand years that women don't have souls, that women weren't people, that women were in fact property. In fact, it goes back to the Code of Hammurabi. Women were straight up fucking livestock. They were livestock, who were assets that were transferred from their fathers to their husbands. The basis of the Bible, the New Testament Bible, like that. Okay, the Roman Empire came after that. The Greeks came after that. Okay, Hammurabi was before all that. So going back 6,000 years, you have this Babylonian dickhead who say women are actually livestock. They've got to be transferred as property from one man to another, from father to husband. Okay, and then all these people turn around saying women don't have souls. Okay, it wasn't necessarily an ancient Egyptian position or the position of all cultures there. It wasn't actually it wasn't actually an Abrahamic position either, if you're being fair about it. However, it was a common position in the Mediterranean and the ruling imperial nations at the time of Aristotle, and for at least several hundred years before that, the women didn't have souls. Okay, they weren't just property. They didn't have souls. They didn't have personhood in general. Okay, and it was considered exceedingly rare for a woman to have any type of authority or any type of economic power like own a business or something like that. Now, out in the sticks or whatever, of course she was working on the farmhouse. She was throwing her weight around, okay, and bossing people around, and, acting like a person. No, but in places like that where the academies were and stuff like that, oh no, they don't, like it's like all the drinking classes and thinking classes, and the people who are making the decisions, including what type of things that they were going to force people to go through when they went out with their Pax Romana and whatever else. Okay? And all of that influenced the founding of the Vatican and the writing of the New Testament by Emperor Constantine in the Nicene Council, and the Gospels that were written in a couple of hundred years before that influenced the decisions made by Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. So basically, the idea of women as property and women as not actually existing and having no souls goes back to ancient Greece. Okay, it goes back to the very same era and before, and even before, a different place before that, like Babylon, where they were talking about Terra Australis Incognita. So it is quite possible that exactly the same people that were trying to figure out if Terra Australis Incognita even existed were the very, very same people who argue that women were property and didn't have identities. Okay, and one of the evidence, and what you'll know about European history, is that they were running on the ecclesiastical court system, and were gradually secularizing over a period of hundreds of years, but they only decided in the British common law courts in 1873 that a woman was allowed to appear in court without two male witnesses to speak for her, which means that that's the first time that they removed that particular biblical or ecclesiastical clause from the secular courts. It represented a secularization of the British common law courts at that point, because that was saying that a woman speaking at court is more important than whether or not the Bible say she's allowed to talk at all. The Bible says she not. She has to have two male witnesses. So for 4,000 to 6,000 years of Europeans and whatever treating women like property and saying they don't have souls, they were saying women were Terra Nullius. They said when the ancient Greeks and that said that women don't have souls, they said they were Terra Nullius, that they were empty land, and that they could be claimed by any man unless you follow those ancient code of their father. He has a flag on her, and you can only transfer ownership or sovereignty to a husband. You have proper dowry and rights and whatever else, and marriage customs are followed for estates and property law. That don't mean the personal sentiment of the father or the husband was that she was, a mindless animal that was under his control. But it sure as shit don't mean that they had the capacity to truly see her as an individual capable of making her own decisions, good or ill. The myth that women are constantly under control of men, that they are faultless because the men are behind them manipulating them, is a fact, because we've never created a situation when it comes to English language or custom or culture where the women are actually truly independent. And worse still, there are plenty of cultures and customs that were they to do so, they would actually be murdered for it, because it would challenge that basic doctrine too much. So if a woman challenges Terra Nullius, what does that happen to her? Does she get a high court ruling where she goes and she said and acts like Eddie Marbo and they listen and say she had a country once? Doesn't matter if there's strangers on there or whatever it might be. If you use that as an analogy, right? If a woman's body was country, because you like to use the word Mother Earth and Gaia, don't you? Well, okay then. If a stranger appeared on her land, like what if a man dispossessed her of his sovereignty by raping her, and then a baby appeared, a stranger on her land, and she went to have an abortion? You would then turn around in USA, for example, and say Roe versus Wade is not allowed. She's not allowed to act in defense of her territory. She has no sovereignty over her own country. You treat women as though they are Terra Nullius. In your religions, you treat them like they're Terra Nullius. That includes the New Age movement and Masonry and whatever else, Satanism and whatnot. You treat women like they're Terra Nullius. You treat them like they're holes. To see a woman as a whole is to see her as Terra Nullius. And guess what? Eddie Marbo overruled Terra Nullius with him and his buddies at the High Court. Because he stood there in the court and said, well, you reckon Uncle Marbo exists? How can you say Terra Nullius when he's down there right in front of you? Are you dumb? How is that not treating Indigenous peoples of the world like they was treating their women? Thank goodness for the Marbos of the world. Yes, he should get a public holiday, definitely.